Good morning. Thank you for joining us on this webinar on the first part, the graphics part of implementing a custom user interface. It's roughly about a 20-minute presentation, and if you have any questions, you can put them in at any point and we can get to them at the end.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we will look at how to implement a custom user interface on the Horner OCS. In this week's webinar, we will focus specifically on graphics. Let's look at our agenda for today. We will start by clarifying what we mean by user interface, and specifically what we mean by a custom user interface. We will then discuss some of the different output formats that custom UI is delivered in. We will then look at how you can take that output and implement it in Cscape. We will also look at some online resources that are available for you to use to create user interface graphic elements. There will be demonstrations throughout, and we will finish with a Q&A session. First, we will define what a user interface is. In general terms, a user interface is simply the creation of visuals that appear on digital products. Examples of these include industrial OCS all-in-one controllers or an operator interface that's used in industrial application. These are digital products with visuals that are used to interface with the user or operator. A user interface design has many different components to consider, such as the color palettes and themes, the visual elements such as text, images, and interactive features such as buttons, presentation of data and information, and the navigation for users to go from screen to screen. When we are referring to a custom user interface specifically, we mean a user interface that has been purpose designed, typically by an industrial designer or a graphic designer. This design is then handed over to an application automation engineer to implement it as closely as possible as designed. We will look at the most efficient ways to do this in Cscape in today's demonstrations. This design can be in a variety of different forms. For example, this design could be handed over to an automation engineer as a storyboard. This looks similar to a comic strip and typically uses sketches outlining the layout of the user's actions, such as what the user would do and what screens the user would navigate to. This design could also be in the form of a wireframe, which is similar to a storyboard but features more details of the structure, navigation, data presentation, and layout. Further into the design process, the design created could be a mock-up. These are files that include realistic-looking images or emulations of what the user interface looks like. The design could also be handed over as a design theme. This could be the palette of colors, fonts, set of icons, or images to be used for the user interface. Today, we will focus on the mockup and the design theme. Let's start by looking at the color palette. If you are given a mockup of a design for a custom user interface, it is common to also get color swatches or a color palette of the colors to be used. You have the ability to specify the color down to the very last detail. So if the color is specified to you in an RGB or CMYK color format, then you can easily incorporate those colors into your project. We will now look at how to implement these custom colors into your project in Cscape. To do this, we will first select the graphics editor from the menu. Here we have an example of an X4 controller screen. There isn't a specific setting here to add a custom color. Instead, you simply add the color as you go through the process of graphic editing. If we right-click on our controller screen and select Set Background to set the background to a set color, we simply select Background Color, and we are given a set of standard colors to choose from. If we instead want to pick a custom color or a more detailed color, we will select the More button. We are then given a wider range of basic colors, as well as the ability to set up custom colors. We already have 3 custom colors set here. To add a custom color, we will select one of the empty squares here, and then type in the red, green, and blue parameters of the color we want. For example, we will set a color where the red element is 232 The green element is 27 and the blue element is 84. This will give us a specific red shade that a client may include as a color swatch or as part of a color palette. We then select Add to Custom Colors, and this color is now added to our palette, which we can easily access to use at any point in our project. Next, we will look at custom screenshots and images. When we are given a mock-up or a prototype, it will have a set of files for each screen that shows exactly what the screen is going to look like. These graphics are usually of a quality that they can be mined to create the screens for our custom user interface. These graphics will often need some sort of conversion, scaling, or editing in an image editor before they are imported into Cscape. It is best practice to do as much of this image manipulation and editing in a software outside of Cscape. It is also important to put the file in the correct file format and size so they can be easily imported into the Horner OCS. Let's look at the workflow we would use to accomplish this. We will look at an example using a mock-up of a thermostat screen design. We want to incorporate this thermostat design into the Horner OCS. To do this, we will use this picture after it's been edited as the background for a screen on the Horner OCS. Before we do this, we will remove all objects on the screen which are going to be changing. In this case, we have a temperature value, which is real-time data, that will change based on the temperature of wherever this thermostat is installed. There are also icons on the screen, which we will assume in this example are simply buttons used to navigate from screen to screen, so we do not need to change these. Instead, we can put invisible push buttons on top of these icons, such as jump buttons for navigation and regular push buttons for the plus and minus buttons on the right-hand side of the screen. We then want to adjust the graphics so that we have the correct dimensions for the OCS screen, both in terms of aspect ratio and size in terms of pixels, so we can easily import the graphic into the Horner OCS. We also need to pick a file format that's friendly to the Horner OCS. BMP files or bitmap files with a 16-bit color depth are a suitable choice for most OCS models, as there's no interpretation of the colors or pixels, so no compression or decompression of the graphic is needed. Finally, we would import this graphic into Cscape as a static bitmap object. Now we will look at this process in Cscape. In this example, this blue screen is where we want to use the image as a background. We have already edited the graphic we will be using as described before, so we've removed all the elements of the graphic that are variable or changing, so we can use it as a static wallpaper or background. We have also resized it as necessary. First, we will select the static bitmap object and simply drag and drop it onto the screen. As we want to use the static bitmap for our background, we will expand the object we just placed to fit the entire screen. Then we double-click on our bitmap and we get the bitmap properties menu. First, we will select the maximum number of colors. Then we will deselect the Scale to Fit option, as we have already scaled our graphic to the exact size we want using image editing software. As our bitmap is taking up the entire screen, we don't need to worry about transparency here. Next, we will pick the bitmap we want to use. We select the bitmap we want to use, then select Open, and then select OK. Now we have our background image fitting our entire screen. For this screen, we will need to add a large font over the top for our temperature, as well as a bar graph or the appropriate graphics here to go up and down for the plus and minus buttons. We will also be using jump buttons for the navigation objects to jump from screen to screen. We will first look at how to implement these navigation buttons. To do this, we will select the jump button from the menu and place it over the area where the user is going to press the button, and then double-click our jump button to get the properties menu. We will make this jump button take the user to screen number 2 when pressed. We will also go to Attributes and uncheck Visible here, which will make this jump button invisible to the user. We will also set a legend that reminds us where this will lead us to. For example, we will say the setup screen here. To leave more room for text, we will also go to our attributes again and deselect Show Icon. This is what our jump button now looks like from the software standpoint. The X through the icon is because we chose to make the button invisible to the user, and when we hover the mouse over this button, we can see that it will take the user to screen 2 when pressed. Next, let's look at our plus and minus buttons. For these buttons, we will be putting standard push buttons on top by selecting the switch button from the menu. These will be tied to some logic in our program that will add 1 or subtract 1 when the button is pressed. So we will double click on our switch button and find a variable that is going to be turned on by the button. In the case of our plus button, this will be increment. Once again, we will select the attributes and make our button invisible. We will also go to our legend and write INC for increment. This is now what our button looks like. This button will be invisible to the user, but once it is pressed, it will trigger our program to add 1 to the total temperature. We will copy and paste this button for the minus button and change a few settings. First, we will change the variable to decrement. We will also change our legend to DEC for decrement. So now we have our background graphic, as well as some invisible operator buttons on top of the icons. Next, we will look at incorporating custom icons and operators into your design. These custom operators and buttons are often designed to provide a specific look or functional appearance to a button or a switch. In the previous demonstration, we treated some of the icons on the graphic as static elements that were a part of the background, so these icons were not separate files. However, we will often want to use a separate icon indicator that we can move around various screens. When given a mock-up for a custom user interface, we may get a set of files with icons to be used in the design, so we want to be able to implement these into our OCS screen design. Now we will look at the steps we would take to implement these custom icons and operators into our design. Similar to before, we will first need to edit these icons using image editing software. As these icons will not take up the full screen, if we want a transparent background on the object, like with the round object shown, then we need to adjust the transparency settings accordingly. Cscape 9.9 can effectively remove the background of most objects. However, this can be more difficult if the background color is also used in the graphic itself. In that scenario, it is best to use your image editing software and set a color for the background that doesn't match anything in the graphic using the paint tool, and then Cscape will be able to easily remove this color. If you are using an icon as a jump button, then you will need to place a static bitmap object over the icon. However, if you are using an image or a set of images as an animation object to show something that is on or off, then you will instead need to place an animation object over the icon. Now let's return to Cscape and look at how we can implement these custom icons and operators into our project. We will start with a new screen, and we will first bring in an icon as an independent graphic. We will do this by using the static bitmap object to draw a box, similar to before. We will double-click this to get the bitmap properties of the graphic, and choose to max out our colors. We will also unselect the Scale to Fit button, as we've previously scaled the graphic to the size we want. Next, we will pick the bitmap we want to use. For this example, we will select the home icon. We will then select Open, and then OK. Now we have the bitmap on our OCS screen. As we don't have a white background color for our screen, we will want to remove the white areas around the icon. If we double-click this icon again, we can select Treat the background as transparent. However, with Cscape, this may leave some areas around the center of the icon that aren't removed properly. We will get better results by instead importing a graphic where we have filled the background with a color that is very different to the icon. So we select this icon and then treat background as transparent with this again, and then select a transparency color that is similar to this red background, and finally select treat similar colors as transparent. Then we will adjust the sensitivity slider until we are satisfied with how much of our background is removed. Next, we will look at how to implement a custom operator slide switch. Because this switch could either be on or off, we will use an animation here and insert it onto our screen as we did before. First, we choose to tie this object to our enable variable so that when the enable variable is on, we will display one graphic, and when the enable variable is off, we will display a different graphic. We will also choose to max out our colors here. We will then pick a frame, so when the value of enable is 0 or off, the screen will show this image, which shows the slide switch in the off position. Then when the frame number or the value of enable is 1 or on, we will select this frame to be shown on the screen, which is the slide switch in the on position. Now we will select OK and look at our switch. We will need to fix the proportions of our switch so it doesn't look stretched out, and we will also need to remove the background. To fix the stretched out of proportion problem, we will uncheck the scale to fit box. We will then opt to treat the background as transparent for each image or frame to remove the background. This has effectively removed the background for both images, so we don't need to take the same steps as before. We will select OK and look at how our switch looks on the screen again. If we look at the properties for our switch again, we can see we have not checked the touch button here. This means our switch is a read-only object, which is going to show us the status of the variable, but won't allow us to change it. If we want this to be an active button that the user can operate, then we need to select the touch option here. We will copy and paste this button to demonstrate both instances of these switches. So our top switch will be operational and has the touch option on, and the bottom switch will be just status or read only and has the touch option off. Let's look at these operators from a user standpoint in our bench setup. Here we have a custom interface similar to the one we just created. If we press the top slider, which has the touch option turned on, we are able to change the state of the switch on and off. If we press the bottom slider, which has the touch option turned off, we can see that this does not change the status of the switch, so this switch is read only. Finally, we will look at where you can find elements that you can incorporate into your custom user interface in the ways shown in today's demonstrations. There are a number of websites and companies that offer content that could be useful to you in your projects, including icon sets, color palettes, or a series of objects that you want to mimic on an OCS. These are usually designed by an artist or a graphic designer. This content is typically not free. However, there are some royalty-free options available which won't have a recurring cost. It is important to note that you should carefully examine the use license before downloading or using any content in your project to make sure that you are not violating anyone's copyrights for the materials that they have created. The content that you can find includes professionally created images and illustrations, icons for navigation and status, color palettes, fonts, and occasionally mock-ups. Cscape also has a symbol library that's available to you for your project. That concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much for listening, and the Q&A session will begin shortly.
Okay, so we do have a part 2 to this next week, which is going to integrate fonts into this user face as well. So you can register for that as usual from the website. It'll be the same time next week. I'm not seeing any questions on that one for the meantime. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you again next week.